What's happening, everyone? This is another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast. And today, because we're in between curriculums, I'm going to give a week of some buffer. But don't leave yet. I know I just said that, but don't leave yet. We have a few things to go over while we talk about this, or while we give you this buffer week. So for the French and Indian War, we're going to give a little bit of a buffer. We started it last week, but we're going to give it a little buffer because some people are behind. And so we want to give them a little bit of time to catch up. And also with Israel, ancient Israel, before we get into that, we're going to give a little buffer, allowing people to catch up. Now, at the same time, we're also going to talk about, in this buffer episode, we're going to talk about something very important. Okay, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about ancient texts. So remember how I was saying a long time ago, and I've been saying it little bit by little bit ever since, that as archaeologists, as historians, we could only do with what we have. We can't just say, hey, we can't go in a time machine. Wouldn't that be cool? I go into a time machine, I punch in a date, I go back and say, hey, this is how it was. Well, and archaeology seems to be somewhat like that, where you're like digging up things and you can almost go back in time. But that's the thing. Almost. I did not say that you're actually back in time, which is an issue because you weren't there. You don't know exactly what was happening. Now, you can suppose you know. You can hope you know. But you can't actually say that you know how it was at that time. So instead, what we have is we have historical documents that have been created. Now, these historical documents are great historical documents when it comes to giving us enough information. It's the best that we can tell. At the same time, we don't know if the people were biased, exaggerated. What is their standard of huge compared to what ours is? I mean, theirs could be, it was this huge ocean, and yet it was a really big lake. Or it was, I traveled forever to get to this place. I got there in like 30 minutes by car. It's a little bit different. So all these things you have to be able to understand when you're learning about history. Here's another thing that you need to understand. Everyone needs to understand this. When looking at historical documents, you don't just blow off one because they're religious text. Because most books, most historical texts that we have from the past, scrolls, books, leaflets, metal, cave drawings, everything, inscriptions of any type. If they're religious text, it just means that they wrote their history and their religious text in the same spot. But you have to be able to understand that sometimes that's all we can get the information from. For instance, if I say the Bible, okay, I say the Bible as a historical text, some of you guys are going to shut off. Some people are going to shut off because the Bible, they don't believe in the Bible. Well, here's the thing. You might not believe just in the religious side, but you cannot blow off the historical side. The things we actually know from that time were actually written in that time or near that time, a lot closer than where we are today. And so if you can just say, well, I don't like the Bible personally, it's just a personal thing, and this is my belief. Well, great, you can have that belief. Don't read it for the religious part. But when it comes to a historical document, you got to be able to understand that is a historical document. But let me give you a difference. Okay, so you have the Bible and you have the Quran. Okay, so this is where you can actually say, oh, wait, saying, okay, there we're getting into controversial matters. But here's the thing. You don't have to get into controversial matters. Okay, so the Quran, some things are not the same thing as in the Bible. I'll give you a big instance, and we're going to be talking about this in the Israel curriculum. But one of the things that's really big in both societies, Christian and Judaism, and over here Muslim, is they both go back to one person. Both of their stories start off with Abraham. So I can only tell that if it's coming from two different locations, Abraham is a literal person. As an archaeologist, as a historian, I would see that as a second witness and something that I can actually put most of my trust in. That there was actually a person named Abraham. Now, you go more into the Quran and the history of the Quran, you'll actually know that it wasn't written until thousands of years later, because Abraham supposedly lived around 2000 to 1800 BC. When was Muhammad born? In the 600s. If he was born, what was that? Almost 25, give or take, years before it was written. That means it doesn't exactly know exactly how it is, what happened. But according to Muhammad, he had a vision of the time of Ishmael. So Abraham was the father of Isaac, who then perpetuated the Jews. And then you have Ishmael, who perpetuated the Arab nations and Muslims, basically. Now, it was all Arab nations. It was not just those that are Muslim. Interesting thing. So Ishmael was ostracized a lot. And so he separated from the family, and he went off to the area that was later to be called Mecca. Well, interesting, in the Quran, it said that Abraham went over there and helped him build basically the center of what would become the Muslim community. It's a historical site. I'll just put it that way. We'll go more into that later on. And we're doing ancient Israel. We'll also be doing ancient Arabic or ancient Arabian or Arab nations. So this is where it becomes a little questionable, because according to the Quran, Abraham was there to serve with Ishmael and build this place. And according to the Bible, Abraham went off and had children, had Isaac, who had Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob had 12 sons, and those became the 12 tribes of Israel. So interesting enough, in the Quran, actually, and in the Bible, same thing happened with Ishmael. Ishmael had 12 princes, which became the 12 tribes of the Arab people. So that's very, very interesting. But here's what you have to weigh yourself against. Okay, so do I believe the historical document that is the Quran and the history that it has there, or do I believe the historical document that is the Bible? Well, the Bible was written closer to it, though if you have the religious side, if you're Muslim, you'll believe the Quran. If you are Jewish, you'll believe the Torah, which is the first 5 books of Moses, or the Bible if you're a Christian. And so, yes, religion does go in there. But again, here's the major part that we have to understand and have to realize and even accept, that the Bible was being written as it was happening or around that time. The Quran was well after that time period. So again, if you're religious, you side with your religious text. But just historically, the historical matters is, I would believe, the one that's the oldest one and has the most witnesses. But interesting enough, where they both begin, totally believe them. Quran's true when it talks about Abraham, as far as we know, when it comes to having Abraham. The Bible is also true, and the Torah is also true when it comes to Abraham, because we have 2 witnesses, 2 different documents from 2 different people saying the same thing. Let me give you another example. Okay, so you have the Bible, who talks about a great flood. Okay, great flood. That can't be true, right? Water that would cover the whole earth? No, it can't be true. Well, what would happen if you went over to Samaria and read the Sumerian King's List? What's the King's List? The King's List is a list of all the kings going back before the Great Flood. Now, here's the thing. Before the Great Flood, it's questionable if they would actually have any information before the Great Flood. But in Mesopotamia, they actually have the culture tells of a time where there was a great flood. Okay, so the Bible says there's a great flood. Mesopotamia says there's a great flood. Oh, look at that. China. China also talks in their ancient texts about a flood as well. That's a third witness. So that's how an archaeologist or a historian figures out, okay, so this part is true and this one is true. This may be true, but we're not quite sure. And they put together history as well as possible together. So let's go over some of the other ancient texts that are also religious. Okay, so we already went over the Bible, which is basically Judaism and Christianity. Christianity has the whole Bible. The 5 books of Moses, the Torah, is for the Jewish community. So that's Judaism. But you also have the Quran, who is Islam, the religion of Islam. Okay, so let's keep going. What are some other ones? Let's go back to Mesopotamia. We talked about this. So we were talking about the Sumerian kings list. That's not a religious document at all. That's a pure factual document as far back as they can get. Who knows when it was actually started, but it was compiled afterwards. Okay, so or during the time of those kings, or near that time with those kings. What's another one? So also from Mesopotamia, you have the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh was a king, a ruler of Mesopotamia. Very ancient, supposedly lived 1,500 years. Now, the Bible actually says that people lived up to about 1,000 years, but nothing after that. Could Gilgamesh have done it? Sure, if the Bible says it, and the tales of those times said it, possibly someone would have lived that long. I can't see it because we don't actually live that long these days. Could it happen in the past? Maybe it could have. As far as we can tell from science, doesn't happen. But again, we don't know because we weren't there. So, Gilgamesh, it is a huge document. It is a hugely influential document. And it also talks about the flood. But it's written by the Mesopotamia. Actually, it's written by the Sumerians who are in Mesopotamia. So, very interesting, very cool. There's a lot of things there. Actually, I hope to pick it up fairly soon to read it. How about the Vedas? It's a Hindu document. So ancient Indian text that includes hymns, rituals, philosophical teachings. They provide insight into the early Indo-Aryan society and religious practices. But the thing is, it's also historical. So there are things in there that we will learn as well. And we'll go to that when we actually talk about the Indus Valley, which is, I think, our curriculum in May. Okay, let's go on to the next one. The Mahabharata. Yes, okay. And the Ramayana. Okay, these are epic poems, including historical, mythological events, and often incite Indian society, politics, and culture. These are also, they're not the normal like poems that you'd find. They're a good size. These are all documents I'd love to be able to read. So this is another one. Have you ever heard of Zoroastrianism? Zoroastrianism. Now, Zoroastrianism, you won't find many people actually believing at this point, but there's the holy text is called the Avesta. And the Avesta gives hymns, rituals, and refers to historical events as well throughout Persia. So, interesting. Dead Sea Scrolls. The scrolls are basically copies of, well, some of them are copies, some are newer ones, are different than what you found. But these are ancient documents, thousands of years old, written during the time of the Bible, and are actually books in the Bible. Or again, other books that were not included in the Bible. Interesting. But again, that's another witness that allows you to solidify what was happening during that time. In my notes, I actually put the Iliad and the Odysseus. The Odyssey of Homer. Now, Homer, possibly mythological. We're actually not quite sure. As historians, no one can actually say Homer was not an actual person. We actually understand that there's a possibility that he is, but we cannot actually say that he is an actual person. So it's philosophical teachings in here, historical documents in here, insight into Chinese governance. Wow, what? No, sorry, not Chinese governance. Wrong line I was reading from. Historical places, events in Greece, and the Mycenaean age. Okay. There's the Analytic of Confucius. Confucius, Chinese. Confucius has a lot of philosophical thoughts in his texts, but it also gives insight into Chinese governance during that time. Ethics, society, all those things. The wars that were happening during that time, during Confucius's time. So, yeah, very interesting. Okay, there's a lot. I mean, the Book of the Dead. We've already talked about that in ancient Egypt. Rituals, hymns, and historical practices, historical events. It also goes into the afterlife. It's a religious text, but it's where we get a lot of the history from because it was most well preserved from that time. Puranas, the Zend Avesta, which is also Zoroastrianism, out of Persia. You have a few other documents that come from Judaism, the Talmud. Sorry. Not the best at that. The Edda. The Edda is a Norse mythology. So, but interesting. While talking about that, we can also talk about and it's not the epics. It's not the voyages. It's going to come to me as soon as we're done. It's not on my list. But these were the journeys, the sagas of the Vikings. They had some religious in there, but they were historical documents. They're almost like journals for the larger Norse community. So, also very interesting. There are so many different. One more, Taoism. The Tao Te Ching is another significant document for Chinese Taoism. Okay, so why are these so important? Why do we use religious texts to give us some historical information? Well, it's because those were the most well preserved. A lot of times, the documents, if they were not that important, they'd be thrown out, burned, or disposed of in some way. And what are the different ways that they were actually preserved? We have the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were on scrolls. We have papyrus from Egypt. We have tablets from Mesopotamia. We have gold, silver, brass plates, metal plates that were inscribed into. I think those were the basic ones that we have. We have cave drawings inside caves. We have paintings on walls. All these different things. We have all these different materials that people used in order to preserve their history. Now, what was the best way of preserving history? Something that was solid. A tablet, a piece of metal, sometimes even wood, but wood would rot away. It would deteriorate in some way. So this being said, these are all different ways of preserving information that help us as archaeologists and historians to overcome the hurdles that we get into when it comes to trying to tell history. Because again, we weren't there. We don't have a time machine. We do the best that we can with what we have, and that's all we can do. So thank you so much for joining me on this buffer day. So we won't be doing one on Thursday. It's basically Monday and Tuesday of this week. The next week, we will start doing the full curriculum again. So thanks for joining us. Can't wait to see you next week. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.